Everyone, and welcome to week one of the lighting portion of AE 311. Today, we're going to discuss layers of light. We're going to talk a little about the role and function of a lighting designer on a greater architectural design team, a little about the industry, and then finally, we'll jump into some basic design principles to give you all some worthwhile things to think about right off the bat. So first off, the key question is why lighting design? So here's a great example right here next to me of what I think is absolutely fantastic lighting design. And your textbook really states this beautifully. Thoughtfully designed light reveals the beauty of architecture's forms and rhythms. And I feel like this design right here is exemplary of that concept. So this project is actually a 2019 Radiance Award winner, so the top award winner for the International Association of Lighting Designers. And really, what this design does well is it makes use of contrast and shadow to reveal and obscure the key elements of this of the architecture in this building. You know, creates new lines and really draws you into the experience of this building without putting a whole lot of light. This is a hotel, so they do also avoid putting a whole lot of light directly into those bedroom windows. You can see deeper in the pockets of that building. So lighting design is a mixture of engineering expertise and aesthetic harmony. So really what you're doing with lighting design and why I love lighting design is it's more than just technical engineering. So if you're an engineer who also enjoys the design aspects, then lighting design might be a good field for you. Something I want to point out real quick throughout my presentations for the rest of the semester, I include references. And so you can see a couple references, this one right above me. So this is actually a reference to your lighting textbook. DWL stands for Designing with Light. And this is literally on page 1 of your textbook. That textbook is linked on Canvas. It's free, so please do take advantage of that. I actually really like this textbook. It's unlike your electrical textbook, it's a much lighter, more enjoyable read with a lot of robust illustrations. And the chapters are short, so don't be intimidated when you see multiple chapters assigned. Oftentimes that's no more than about 15, 20 pages that are half photos with minimal text. Also, when relevant, you can see at the bottom over there is a linked reference. So if you open up the slides on Canvas, those links like that are actually clickable. So you can click through and get more information about that project. So building on this, most projects don't include a lighting designer, and that's really kind of relevant to the profession of lighting design. What happens with most of these spaces, like the rectilinear office hell you see to my right, is most often these simple kind of spaces are not going to have a lighting designer handling them. So in the best case, that means an architect or an interior designer is handling the lighting. And for a space like this, that's oftentimes more than suitable. Worst case, you end up with the electrical contractor designing the lights. And maybe if you're lucky, it's the lighting sales or an electrical engineer, hopefully a Penn State electrical engineer, designing those lights. So they've had some exposure to good lighting design in the past. When the project's lighting is designed by someone other than a lighting designer, is basically you're just going to get the fundamental light levels to minimally support the visual tasks and nothing more. And that's how we get these very drab, very regular rectilinear office spaces that don't create a whole lot of visual interest because they're just delivering the light required to function. So, can we do better? Here's a couple of examples of better. This is something that I really appreciate. So, this is a great example of pathfinding. So we can use light to guide and direct the eye to features and destinations. We can create focus. For example, when you enter a hotel lobby, you could when you come in, you need to be guided to the front desk. So the simple solution there is just to make that the brightest point in the lobby so that your eye is immediately drawn to your intended destination. And so you can see that throughout this project here. Not only is there guides along this curve that direct you safely up this incline, but you can also see right here these lines of light on the ground that actually are drawing you into the structure itself. Lighting can entertain and advertise. We can set moods and create immersive experiences by manipulating the light. This is actually a big part of what got me into lighting design. This is actually one of my designs because I primarily worked in entertainment lighting before coming to Penn State. But probably the more salient part of this from an engineering perspective is simply energy. Energy is a big part of lighting design. And you can see there's our slice of the pie over there in the bottom right. The commercial sector uses 18% of all the energy produced in the United States. And a chunk of that, a big chunk of that is lighting. And you can see from 2003 to 2012, I apologize, I don't have a newer version of this plot, but you can see the change over that decade where the energy consumption of lighting absolutely plummeted. It cut in half over that decade. And so a lot of that was driven by LEDs. But in order to keep this moving forward and keep hitting our energy targets, what we need is lighting designers because it's not enough just to have better technology. We need to utilize that technology correctly. So something that we'll discuss later on in the semester is energy codes. In particular, ASHRAE 90.1 has an entire chapter dedicated to lighting and sets standards for lighting efficiency. Of course, LEDs are a big part of this and the improvements in technology that come along with them. And we're still improving LEDs. Right now, we're sitting around 100 lumens per watt for architectural fixtures. But the Department of Energy has set a goal, and it seems attainable that we're going to hit a 200 lumen per watt standard in the next decade. LEDs are extraordinarily versatile with tiny form factors, very low heat generation, incredible lifetime and reliability, and of particular interest to my research, incredible control of color as well. But none of that means a thing without controls. And that's another topic we'll discuss later on in the semester. Controls are a big part of how we realize the energy savings associated with LEDs. So LEDs are an inherently digital device. They come with a microcontroller on board. They basically don't function without one. And so they're inherently controllable light sources. But without a lighting designer, oftentimes you just end up with an on-off switch or analog dimmer, which is wildly inappropriate for something that's controlled with a digital wave. So controls are a big part of how we really realize the energy savings by making our LEDs intelligent and responsive to the actual needs of the occupants of the spaces we design for. And then finally, daylighting, and in particular, modeling. And we do have a daylight modeling class taught by Dr. Mistrick, is a big part of those energy savings. Utilizing daylight is both preferred by your occupants, it's healthier, and it's more energy efficient. So that's the next big step, is better use and more intelligent use of daylighting. So moving past energy, safety is a big part of lighting. So the obvious emergency lighting, but it's much more than that. We can also consider a lot of forms of task lighting that highlight hazards in our environment, so that we don't fall down these stairs and not notice the step. Or perception of safety. For example, a park at night needs to be well lit in order for anyone to actually consider using that path at night. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean you're safer, but nonetheless, the perception of safety is crucial, and lighting does deliver that. We can talk about health and lighting. So, a big part of that is environmental health, and light pollution is a major topic with LEDs, because we can output so much light so quickly. And gas stations, I think, are the quintessential example of this, because you're more likely to go to a gas station that's more brightly illuminated because you perceive it as cleaner and safer. However, that is absolutely terrible for light pollution, and also bad for night blindness. Imagine pulling out of this gas station onto the road right next to it. You're not going to be able to see a thing, right? And so glare is an important consideration in lighting design, and how we mitigate glare and design for visual comfort. And then, of course, the latest element in this puzzle of lighting and health is circadian photobiology. Most of you are probably already using blue light filters on your phone and on your computer. I highly recommend them. They work, and they work in the background, so you basically don't even notice it, and they're subtly improving your quality of life every day. So, and a big part of that is just light exposure at night, keeping you up, or alternatively, the lack of light exposure in the morning. Sure, all of you get plenty of outside time as well, but exposure to high light levels, to bright daylight in the morning, can be very effective at lifting your mood, improving your sense of well-being, and improving your productivity. So circadian photobiology is a major emerging field as we learn more about how light interacts with our circadian system. So let's talk a little about the lighting industry. So what we focus on here at Penn State is naturally architectural lighting design, because we are in the architectural engineering department. However, it's probably worth noting that architectural lighting design is only one piece of a much larger pie. And in fact, the original architectural lighting designers, and we're going to talk about one of them in just a few minutes here, all came from the theatrical world. So the first lighting designers, the first hardcore lighting designers, were all theatrical designers. And now more and more, we're seeing a third leg of this, which is the entertainment lighting design. And each of these fields have different experts, have different equipment, and different techniques to achieve their lighting goals. And so now I claim the architectural field, but before I came to Penn State, I spent 10 years in entertainment lighting, traveling all over the country, doing designs like that one at the top right. So let's talk a little about the role of an architectural lighting designer within the greater field of architecture. So we can start by thinking about just the lighting designer and the building. So the building is going to have a building owner, and the building owner is going to hire an architect and a general contractor. And those are the people that typically report directly to the building owner. The architect is responsible for establishing a design team. And typically that's where a lighting designer comes in as a member of that design team. They might be within that larger architecture firm, or the architecture firm might hire a specialized lighting design firm to support their project. Now, typically, when you design the lighting system for a project, you're going to work with lighting representatives who are in sales and marketing, and they are going to help you identify the equipment appropriate for your project and also suppliers to get that equipment to your project. And you'll supply those plans, of course, to an electrical subcontractor who is responsible for installing your design and working with you to make your design intent real. And then the last pieces of the circle of light are there. The lighting manufacturer sitting at the bottom of the circle is supplying information to lighting reps, supplying equipment to distributors, who then pass those things up the circle of light until they get back into real buildings. So that's the circle of light, and a nice diagram to help illustrate the way the architectural lighting design industry functions. Penn State is the number one source of graduates in the field of architectural lighting design. So at our career fair, which is massive, as I'm sure most of you are at least aware of, um, there are lighting designers being hired by lighting design firms and architecture firms. You can fill the role of a lighting or electrical engineer within an AE or an MEP firm. Lighting reps work for sales and marketing agencies. And of course, there's even a decent number of our graduates end up in manufacturing, especially our master's and PhD students. And so there's a variety of advantages to each of these paths. And there's a lot of good options out there. So designers typically get the most exciting projects. And if you're in it for the beauty of light, then lighting designer is probably the role you're looking for. Uh, if you're more technically inclined, lighting electrical engineers typically get a little better pay, and they're a little less design oriented. Lighting reps, if you're a people person, lighting a representative might be the way to go. That tend to get excellent pay, or at least have the potential for excellent pay, as most sales positions do. Um, but it's of course much faster paced and very people oriented. So depends on if that's your cup of tea. And if you want to go the hardcore engineering route, manufacturing is probably the right place. And there's some cool opportunities right now in LEDs to create some really, really nifty new products. Let's switch into talking about design, because I'd like to spend the rest of this lecture on some basic design concepts, just to give you some tools to start thinking about light in a more structured manner. So we'll start with Richard Kelly. So Richard Kelly is considered the father of architectural lighting design. Um, he was basically the OG architectural lighting designer. He opened his lighting design firm in 1935, and in fact, he's one of many architectural lighting designers that actually came from the theatrical field into architecture. And he created what's widely known as the three forms of light play. So this is common terminology among all lighting designers, still in regular use today. So I want to cover them briefly. So his first type of light play is ambient luminescence. Focal glow is his next form of light play. And then finally, play of brilliance. So play of brilliance is where you get more into the dazzle of light. Now, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time digging into this. I highly recommend taking a look at your textbook, pages 10 through 13. Your textbook includes the original Richard Kelly's original descriptions of his three forms of light play, and the way he describes them is absolute poetry, as only a theatrical lighting designer would. So please do take a moment to check those out. It's well worth it. So rather than focus on Richard Kelly's three forms of light play, I want to use a little simpler, a little more modern terminology to focus you in on. And so instead of ambient luminescence, we're just going to call that ambient light. And so here's some great examples of ambient light to my right here. So ambient light provides the base illuminance in a space. So it's broad and diffuse, it's smooth and it's even, right? It's often shadowless light, and it fills the entire space with light and allows you to interact with that space. We can also talk about task lighting. So this is more when we're talking about a specific visual task. So you are designing light for a space and you identify a particular need. For example, the need not to fall down a set of 3 stairs, or the need for under cabinet lighting on your counter so you can see when you're preparing food, or to highlight a whiteboard to make it easier for the students in the back of the classroom to read. So task lighting is light dedicated to support a specific visual task. And so usually that means it's going to be local and directed specifically on that task alone. So the third type of light that is crucial to architectural lighting design is accent lighting. So accent lighting can take a lot of forms, and this is where you really get into the beauty of architecture. You can create interest, right? The contrast and the shadow of the facade of this building. You can draw focus. For example, up here, you can draw focus onto the artwork by making that the brightest part of this wall. You can also do that in retail environments. So you can draw focus to the products or 2 points of interest deeper within the space to guide and direct your customers' attention. Revealing architecture is a big part of it, and also pathfinding. For example, here, this is revealing that beautiful arch over the front door, but it's also making that the brightest point in the scene, which is going to draw you towards that as your natural destination at the end of this path. Accent can create, of course, the contrast and highlight, and really is the beauty of architectural lighting design. So to those core 3, I want to add 2 more types of light that are worth mentioning, but are less crucial to the practice of architectural lighting design, and that's decorative light. So when we're talking about decorative light sources, typically these are going to be lower light levels because they're intended to be viewed directly. So they're going to contribute very little to the actual illumination of a space, and instead they are the point of interest in and of themselves. For example, that peacock or that gorgeous chandelier over in the top right corner. And then the last type of light I'm going to introduce is kinetic light. This is a lot less important within architectural lighting, simply because we're usually using static light. The pinnacle of quality architectural lighting design is subtlety and elegance. If you are noticing the lighting, chances are the design isn't actually that good. Now, we can contrast that with entertainment lighting design, where kinetic lighting dominates that sphere, right? And so, the purpose of kinetic lighting is to create change and motion, and that can come in the form of follow spots. It can come in the form of controllable entertainment lighting, but we also shouldn't forget that daylight is in many ways a form of kinetic lighting, and the shadow and contrast it can create in a space can reveal entirely different facets of a space throughout the course of a day. So I just want to quickly map those concepts just to connect the dots for you. So um, the basic types of light here, ambient, task, and accent, are the core of what you're interested in for architectural lighting design and the core of what we're going to be talking about throughout the rest of this semester. Ambient, mapping that back to Richard Kelly's three forms of light play. Obviously, ambient and ambient luminescence are talking about the same concept. When we're talking about focal glow, Richard Kelly really meant accent lighting. And so you can take a look in your textbook and read Richard Kelly's original description of focal glow and see that connection. Um, Task lighting can also be focal glow, obviously, but doesn't neatly fit into that definition, but is nonetheless a crucial component of what we do in architecture. And then, so moving on to accent lighting, that's your focal glow for the most part, and then the play of brilliance, so that the razzle dazzle in the lighting design, right? That can be decorative or kinetic or accent lighting. Um, that's the creative aspects of the lighting design. Let's talk a little about Flynn modes. So Flynn modes are one of my favorite concepts in lighting design. When I first came to Penn State, it was one of the concepts that really changed the way I thought about lighting design. Now, here's a short list of Flynn's core modes, or the subjective impressions that he studied and identified specific patterns and forms of light that support these subjective impressions. This list is not exhaustive. Obviously, there are many more impressions of a space you can have than just these five. But from a design perspective, these are useful because there are clear recommendations to get us to these places. And John Flynn, by the way, was actually a Penn State professor back in the 70s. So an old school lighting professor here. And he specialized in the psychology of light, so psychophysics, which is actually my field in lighting. Um, and his research was crucial in identifying and specifying specific patterns to create particular subjective impressions. The best reference for these is actually provided on Canvas. It's an excerpt from the IES Handbook 10th edition. So please do take a look at that. It provides you a nice table to lay out exactly what these different modes are, how to create them, and gives you some really nice examples of spaces that utilize these Flynn modes. So let's take a look at these in a little more detail here. So we'll start with preference. So the basic lighting recommendations you're going to see are actually fairly repetitive. So the different design factors are utilized throughout these modes. So when we talk about preference and enhancing occupants' preference for an interior space, perimeter lighting is a great way to reinforce that. In fact, perimeter lighting in general is great. Most people really don't like being spotlighted. They don't like feeling like they're on stage. So perimeter lighting is going to come up again and again in these Flynn modes. Non-uniform lighting is important. That creates that contrast and shadow, that variety and interest that we talked about earlier with accent lighting. And then, of course, bright. So people generally prefer higher light levels. People generally consider brighter spaces to be more attractive, more interesting, and they're more willing to spend time in those spaces. So bright, non-uniform perimeter lighting, and we can see that exemplified in these spaces over here. So this is probably the cleanest example. So you can see the focus on the perimeter here with these downlights highlighting the walls, with the cove lighting up above me that is highlighting the ceiling. So the ceiling is a perimeter of your space, right? And so there are some of these downlights you can see above me here and here that are just putting light into the center of the space to fill it in and create that ambient glow. However, the focus is clearly on the perimeter, and most of the lighting equipment you see on the space is directed towards the walls. So that's that perimeter focus. And of course, you can see with the can downlights creating that uneven scalloped feel here and here. Another approach is daylight. Never forget daylight. Daylight is a powerful aspect of lighting design because a lot of spaces can and should have good access to daylight. And so, again, that's going to give you that nice perimeter look, and it's going to give you that high light level that absolutely fills a space with that soft, diffuse ambient light. So, the next Flynn mode we'll discuss is relaxation. So, here's a variety of relaxing spaces. Again, the focus is on perimeter lighting. And again, we're looking at non uniform, but the main difference between preference and relaxation is we're going to go with more dim lighting, especially in the immediate vicinity of your occupants. So you can see here is a great example. Um, right here, we have this lovely patio space with some nice non-uniform lighting, highlighting the trees, highlighting the pergola in the background, but relatively low light levels right on those chairs there. So it has that perimeter feel, that non-uniform look, and it's got nice, comfortable light levels. Similarly, we've got that feel again here in this living room space. We've got that nice perimeter around the ceiling to give you that ambient fill light. But we're keeping the light levels low, and you've got some play of light coming in from those windows. Similarly, in the theater, you've got that uneven perimeter look at low light levels that just makes a space relaxing and allows you to spend time in there. And so that can be a especially powerful tool to use in a place like a coffee house, where the more time your customers spend there, the more money you're going to make. Privacy. So privacy, again, we're taking like small steps here. Privacy is fairly similar to relaxation, but the main difference here is we're going to have less emphasis on the perimeter, right? So we want to have that dim, non-uniform light, but we can create a more enclosed feel if we take some of that focus off of the perimeter. Going the exact opposite direction, spaciousness. So spaciousness is really reinforced by that perimeter light, but also by uniform light. So you want bright, uniform perimeter light to really open up a space. And I really like this hallway here. So this is a long, narrow hallway. So without this wall washer, just creating this line of light to guide you down the hallway, and it really pulls your sight lines down the longest dimension of this space. Otherwise, you'd be focusing on the walls close to you, and it would feel much more enclosed than it does in this photo here. Similarly, cove lighting is really effective at opening up a space because you get that emphasis up on the ceiling, which draws sight lines upward and outward, just opening up that space and making it feel much larger than it would normally. And then the last Flynn mode is visual acuity. So uh, we're again looking for bright light here and uniform light. There's some emphasis on the perimeter, less than with spaciousness, where spaciousness is really driven by that perimeter look. For visual acuity, you really need uniform light, specifically on the work plane. And so a lot of architectural lighting design is going to be focused on visual acuity. It's common and it's practical. And so bright, even light, and especially shadowless light is really going to enhance visual acuity. So we can group lighting design approaches into three major categories. Again, this isn't intended to be an exhaustive list. It's just intended to give you some vocabulary to start your thinking about the different approaches we can take to architectural lighting design. So your textbook groups this into three primary areas, which are pragmatic, aesthetic, and conceptual. Let's take a closer look at some of those, starting with, of course, pragmatic, which is going to be the bread and butter of architectural lighting designers. So, what we're doing with pragmatic lighting design is relatively straightforward. We want to start by defining the visual tasks. For example, in this space, we've got a handful of obvious visual tasks. We want to have good light levels on this table here so that anyone sitting at this table can easily read things in front of them. You want to fill the room up with a nice full diffuse ambient glow, and that's what this cove overhead is doing. You also have some tasks along the side here. For example, you have an alcove right here, which is probably like a coffee station or whatnot. And so you're going to provide additional light right there so that you can use the services available in that alcove. So the focus with pragmatic design naturally is on your ambient and your task lighting. Visual acuity will be the most common Flynn mode utilized in pragmatic lighting design, not necessarily the only one, um, but that's going to be the main focus. And the goal is creating a design that is efficient, both in cost and energy consumption, and code compliant, which oftentimes will reinforce that energy efficiency goal. We can talk about aesthetic lighting design. And aesthetic lighting design is where it gets a little more interesting. And this is another common type of architectural lighting design. In fact, this is one of the main reasons you would want to hire an architectural lighting designer is to really enhance the experience of a space. So you start with pragmatic design when we're talking about aesthetic design. You still want to identify your visual needs and provide your ambient fill for your spaces. So, but you want to go past that, right? And how you go past that is with accent lighting. And so, accent lighting is going to be the main tool in your toolbox to enhance the beauty and experience of that space. As far as Flynn modes go, it could be a variety of things. It depends entirely on the intended use for that space. Typically, when we're talking about aesthetic design, it's not going to be visual acuity, but it's up to you to decide which Flynn mode that you want to utilize for various spaces. In this case, this is going to be a little bit of spaciousness. You can see with the perimeter uplighting on the walls here. It's going to be a little bit of relaxation because you've got that non-uniform perimeter look and lower light levels. So you can mix those modes to create the experience or the mood and environment that you're going for in that space. And finally, we have not pragmatic lighting design, rather conceptual lighting design. I apologize. Um, so conceptual lighting design really largely eschews pragmatism. You're going to be guided by metaphor. And the example provided in your textbook is the Flatiron Building in New York. I actually don't love this as an example of conceptual lighting design, but nonetheless, I like to stick with your textbook so that I'm talking about things that you can then immediately go reference afterwards. So in terms of the Flatiron design, here's a concept image. As far as I know, this was actually never installed, but the guiding metaphor for this concept is that this was like the prow of a ship sailing through an urban ocean. So that's where the highlights on the top come from, especially that highlight all the way out on the end. It really draws that sight line along the building to make it look like it's sailing through that urban ocean. And you can take a look in your textbook. They also recommended um, color gradients to help further reinforce this. In fact, what's at this site now, if you look up the Flatiron Building, underneath it is actually some interactive light art installations. So they got at least part way there for this building. But conceptual design is going to be your most esoteric, where you are trying to create a particular experience rather than overly concern yourself with the technical needs of the space or the facade. Okay, well that concludes my lecture for today. This was our first lighting lecture. I appreciate your time and attention, and I'm looking forward to digging into more lighting with all of you throughout the rest of the semester.